How many have been enjoying this walk through Daniel? We're about halfway through, and this is really the last big story in the life of Daniel. And next week we transition to rewind to some different points in Daniel's lives and some big, weird dreams that he has that had prophetic messages about the future. But this story, we're still grounded in the life of Daniel and his friends. These young men have lived an extraordinary life. But it's not necessarily because they chose it. They didn't set up to say, like, hey, we're going to do something great. They were abducted from their hometown and brought to another country. They weren't looking to pick fights with anyone, but people kept trying to push them about their faith while they lived in this pagan city of Babylon. First, they were pushed to eat food that they weren't supposed to, then to interpret a dream or all of them die, and then to bow before this big golden idol. And in all of these situations, the young Hebrew men did what they could to help this place, but they refused to betray their faith in their God. So then we saw the story kind of focus in more even on Daniel as he weathers king after king, rising and falling while he lives the life of a stranger in Babylon. A good citizen, but first and foremost, a follower of the one God. First, Daniel does the hard job of telling Nebuchadnezzar that God was going to humble him. And then years later, he interprets the handwriting on the wall for King Belshazzar. Surprise, surprise. God was going to humble him. And through all this, and all these situations of living in a pagan empire of Babylon, Daniel could have just fit in and made their priorities his priorities, their values his values. But for decades, he deliberately followed the Lord despite the culture. So in chapter 6, if you want to turn there, in Daniel chapter 6, we get a glimpse of how Daniel is able to be so strong and how he is able to live in this way. It's not about him. He goes to a secret place to get his strength. And here in a minute, in chapter 6, the world outside will bust into his life once again and test his faith. But one thing that sticks out about the life of Daniel is how excellent he is at his job. Colossians 3:23 tells us that whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. Ecclesiastes 9:10 tells us that whatever your hands find to do it with all your might. 1 Thessalonians 4:11 tells us to aspire to live quietly and mind your own affairs and to work with your hands as we instructed you. That's one of the big lessons we learn from the book of Daniel, is how to be good at your job, whatever it is. To live at peace and work with your hands. Don't be a slacker or a complainer, because your work can be worship. And people can see your good works and glorify God. Did you know that God gave Adam and Eve a job in the garden before sin ever came around? Work isn't part of the fall. We are made to be cultivators, to help things grow, to flourish, to create, and do the hard work. This pleases God, and it provides us with satisfaction. Working harder at things than anyone else, things that no one else sees and no one else notices, is a way that we can worship God and point to Him. Some of us shudder at the thought of inviting our coworkers because they know better than anyone else who we really are when no one is looking. Don't live in a way like that, where you betray yourself. Work like God is watching, because He is. Well, another new boss notices this about Daniel in Daniel chapter 6, and he is promoted once again. Now, we've seen Daniel through Nebuchadnezzar, and then Belshazzar, and now under Darius, the king of the Medes. In verse 1, it said, it pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give an account, so that the king might not suffer loss. And then Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So the position of satrap was like a governor, and one of their main jobs was to collect taxes. And King Darius of the Medes trusted Daniel not to steal from him, so much so that Daniel was one of three over all of these 120 satraps. And then again, Daniel once again rises to the top, not by shaking hands or kissing babies, but by working hard and having a good attitude. In fact, he does such a good job that the king is thinking about placing Daniel as the prime minister over the whole kingdom. How does Daniel keep doing this? How does he rise to the top over and over and over again, no matter who the king is? Well, Daniel's co-workers get super jealous. Daniel isn't that great. They start looking for him to trip up, and they want to take him down. Verse 4, then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. Daniel's co-workers looked and looked and looked for something to tell the king that he was doing wrong. But they couldn't find anything, because Daniel remembered he worked for the God who sees everything and had blessed him so much. Maybe reading a story like this makes you a little nervous about your choices at work. It's not too late to start working heartily for the Lord. I haven't always done a great job of that. I've mentioned before, and I don't know why everybody laughs when I say that, I mentioned before that I used to work at Chuck E. Cheese. For a couple years after high school, I was taking some classes at a community college, trying to figure life out a little bit, and I was a maintenance man, cleaning bathrooms and tubes and the ball pit, emptying tokens and refilling tickets. I generally tried hard, but there were some things that the management didn't know. They had seen and believed that I tried so hard that they wanted to promote me to assistant manager. I was like 19, 20 years old, and a well-meaning general manager said, hey, you can do more with your life than this. And I appreciate that. He saw something bigger in me. But they didn't know everything I did. I got there at 6:30 or so in the morning to start cleaning. And those of you that know me know that I am not a morning person. I can wake up early, but I hate it. And I don't feel normal until about 10 o'clock in the morning. I even fell asleep at the wheel once driving to Chuck E. Cheese, and that's a whole different story. But cleaning the sky tubes was not exciting. Cleaning anything at that early in the morning is not exciting at all. And it was all that I could do to keep my eyes open. And there was more than once, I'm ashamed to say, that I crawled under the super shot basketball game and took a little snooze. If you don't know what that looks like, it's open in the back, it's real warm under there, and it's great. I'm cleaning under here. I'm not proud of it, and I would have been so embarrassed if they would have caught me under there sleeping. For those moments, I was not working heartily as unto the Lord. But no matter how hard Daniel's coworkers tried to catch him sleeping under the super shot game, they never could. And they began to hate him for it. They knew that the only way that they could trip him up is if they made it illegal for him to worship his God. King Darius thought Daniel was amazing, but Daniel's co-workers tricked the king, and they buttered him up and told him how great he was. And then these other rulers decided to get the king to make this special law in order to honor the king. And the law stated that for 30 days, no one could ask any man or God for anything. They must instead, if they needed something, ask the king himself. And this symbolized, and this acted out, their belief that everything good came from King Darius. And they pushed this loyalty test for this new kingdom that had just absorbed Babylon. Their slogan, something like, "Bring unity, bow to the king." But there was an ulterior motive for these rulers that pushed this idea to the king. Daniel's co-workers knew that every day, 3 times a day, for years and years and years, that Daniel knelt down and prayed to ask God for help. Every day, the same place, he got down on his knees in an upstairs window and prayed towards Jerusalem, their home, the place where he had been taken from, the place God had given his people, but they had lost because of their sin. And he repented for their country's sin, and he asked for God to bring them back. And Daniel would talk to God about his life and ask him to help him with these things, and he gave thanks. In that window, every day, 3 times a day, Daniel fought a battle on his knees. And this is where Daniel's strength comes from. This is how you can look through chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and see, how was Daniel able to do this? This is how it happened. This is where his strength came from. He knew that the Most High, who rules over the kingdom of man, who raises kings and makes them fall, he knew where to go for that strength. And he made sure to remind himself who was in charge 3 times a day, every day. There wasn't much extraordinary about Daniel except that every day he recognized that he was weak and that he needed the help of an extraordinary God. And Daniel wasn't going to stop worshiping God for any king. He didn't do it as a teenager, and he won't do it as an elderly man. You've probably heard the punishment of that they had set up for disobeying the king during these 30 days. Daniel was thrown into a lion's den. The king was not happy that he was tricked into punishing his employee of the month. But there was a problem. He knew that he could not go back on his decree. The laws of the Medes and Persians, once issued, were considered irrevocable even by the king himself. So verse 16, then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. And then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Old man Daniel, thrown into a cave with a bunch of lions. The king hopes and prays that Daniel's going to be okay. In fact, he puts a rock in front of the mouth of the cave and seals it with his signature to make sure that no one can get in there and kill David, just in case he doesn't get torn to shreds by these lions by some miracle. Now, these lions knew the drill. Daniel wasn't the first person thrown down there. And these lions were not pets. They were being starved to death so that they would eat anything that came in. But for some reason, Darius the king still thought that there might be a way that Daniel could survive this. Maybe the king had heard how Daniel had interpreted the handwriting on the wall the night that he conquered Babylon. Or maybe he had seen God use him in some other, or heard those ways that God had used him before in the past. For some reason, Darius thought that Daniel's God just might do something. Couldn't sleep or eat all night. Verse 19. And then at the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. And as he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" And then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. May my God sent his angels and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king. I have done no harm." And once again, Daniel followed God rather than man, and God blessed and protected him. And the king's so happy and taken back by how God saved Daniel, and he breaks into this spontaneous worship song. First, he makes a decree that everybody needs to fear God. Verse 26, I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forevermore. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. Once again, Daniel's faith and God's working through Daniel's life have caused a pagan king to fear the one God. As punishment for tricking the king, Daniel's enemies and their families get tossed into a lion's den and get eaten before they even touch the ground. And I'm not sure that would have been Daniel's choice necessarily, but Babylon was a brutal place, a cruel place. You may feel like you work in a place or live in a place that is hostile to those that follow God. And Daniel felt this way more than most. But God used Daniel to show another king that the Most High rules in the kingdom of man. And this started as a 30-day worship service, bowing down to worship King Darius. But the king himself asked God to deliver Daniel, and God did. And once again, we see that the only king that deserves all glory, all power, and all honor is the King of Kings. And everyone else is just passing through. Daniel finds himself again in one of these situations where he could have gotten out of it if he just said, I'll bow to do whatever you want me to do. I won't pray for a month, or maybe I'll just pray in my head instead of in the window. No one will know. But Daniel felt like he shouldn't change what he was doing for some silly, superficial law that stroked the vanity of man. And once again, Daniel prospered during the reign of another king while keeping his integrity and his faith. Like the story of the fiery furnace, the story of Daniel in the lion's den has also strengthened the faith of believers for centuries, especially in the persecuted church. In fact, there are several murals, just like the fiery furnace, of this scene in the catacombs of Rome where early Christians hid from persecution. And this was, once again, something that they looked at while they're getting thrown into the Colosseum or while they're getting put up on stakes by Nero and burned alive, that they looked at to say, God rescues, God can deliver, but ultimately God is in charge. And Daniel is a stranger. His co-workers unfairly hate him. The world doesn't get him. And to them, worshiping some invisible God rather than pleasing a king that can give you stuff doesn't make sense. But Daniel is reminded that all of this is temporary. There's no reason to fall in love with the powers and things of this world. All kings and kingdoms will bow before God one day. Daniel works in the corrupt field of politics. But all the while, he didn't betray himself. He worked like God was watching. He cultivated and grew things, and he wanted God to be pleased with what he saw. He wasn't sleeping under the hotshot game. But when the time came to compromise his faith, he disagreed without being disagreeable, and God protected him and blessed him and even promoted him. This is reminiscent of the story of Joseph, right, and the coat of many colors, who became the prince of Egypt. The same worked for him. Doing good work, having an excellent spirit, but not compromising our faith because we work for God. It's a hard world to live in today. Everybody wants you to fall in with their side, and they want to demonize you if you're not exactly where they are, whatever their cause and their movement. But all of this is going to one day be dust. And all pleasures and possessions of this world will also be dust. Missionary and preacher C.T. Studd wrote a poem that encapsulates this idea. Here's a small part of it. It says, "Only one life, the still small voice, gently pleads for a better choice, bidding me selfish aims to leave and to God's holy will to cleave. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Only one life, yes, only one. Now let me say, thy will be done. And when at last I'll hear the call, I know I'll say 'twas worth it all. Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And when I am dying, how happy I'll be if the lamp of my life has been burned out for thee. Many a person has gone through this life realizing that they bowed to all the wrong kings, and they worked for all the wrong things, and they ignored the most important and squandered everything truly good in this life. But Daniel is an example of a person who throughout his whole life kept his focus on God. 3 times a day, every day, he talked to God. He thanked God. And adversity kept coming to find him as he tried to focus on God, but he refocused every day, 3 times a day. Babylon at this time was glorious, and there was many things he could have distracted himself with. But instead, he fixed his eyes on God and trusted him when decisions were hard. Daniel was a rebel with civility, whose strength was in the Lord. Daniel worked hard. He had an excellent attitude and spirit. And he sought to live quietly, but he never wavered in his faith. And he fought a battle on his knees 3 times a day, every day, asking God to give him the strength that he needed and to bless him. And God did. In this life, Daniel never heard the name of Jesus. He lived way before that. But Daniel was like Jesus. He had fake charges brought against him. He stayed quiet and firm in the face of a trial. He was sentenced to death. A stone was rolled in front of the cave, and he came out alive. God saved Daniel, but Jesus saved himself. And because of what Jesus did, we too can live like Daniel as strangers in this world, faithful, steadfast, quietly courageous, trusting that in every trial, God sees, God knows, and in the end, God delivers. We know Daniel's secret, and we know why he was so strong. He got on his knees and he talked to God every day. And this is how you can be strong too. Every head's bowed and eyes closed as we head into a time of meditation to deal with God and to talk to God about whatever he just talked to us about. The band's going to come and we're going to sing in just a minute, but before we get there, is there some part of your life, something about you, that you would be embarrassed if people found out? They searched and searched Daniel's life for something, and the only thing that they could figure out is we got to make it illegal to pray to God. For us, what are those things in this life that don't jive with who we want to be? That don't jive with who we present ourselves as? Maybe it's something at work, and we're dishonest in order to get a deal done, or we cut corners. Maybe it's something in our relationships where we've got some secret sin, and it's tearing us apart. The God that made you knows you are destined for better. Sin in our life is sin because it's bad for us. God doesn't pick things out of a hat to make wrong. Sin is bad for us. It hurts us. And these things are boundaries in our life that keep us from being broken. But the God that made you loves you so much, and he wants to break every chain in your life. He wants to break every habit, every sin, anything in your life that doesn't line up with who He wants you to be. There's no one too far away from God today that He can't get you to where He wants you to go. So whatever that thing might be this morning, we're going to stand to our feet. And the altar's open this morning. Maybe you have something like that to deal with. Or maybe it's just you've got some big things that you're scared about financially or health or something else that's going on in your life. And you want to come down here. It doesn't have to be necessarily some huge sin or something like that. It can just be that you need to say, God, like Daniel, I need to refocus my heart on you and to remember who is in control and who I serve. We saw where Daniel got his strength, and it was on his knees. We're going to sing. Altar's open. You pray in your seat. You pray down here. Whatever God moves in your heart. But let's not leave here until God has worked His way in us.